Adorama TV presents Digital Photography One-on-One, where we answer your questions. Here's your host, Mark Wallace.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Digital Photography One-on-One. I'm Mark Wallace. Well, this week we're in the last part of a 5-part series all about shooting video on a DSLR. We actually started in episode 48, where I showed you a bunch of the basics of shutter angles and frame rates and all that kind of stuff. And so if you haven't seen episode 48, you might want to watch that, because some of the principles and items that I brought up there we're going to be using in this episode. And in this episode, I'm going to be talking about how to make sure that those videos that you've shot and edited look great on the web. Now, when I started putting videos on the web, there was one thing that I really wanted to know, and that was what settings do I use to make sure that my videos look perfect when I throw them up to YouTube and Vimeo and other sites. And it was really difficult for me to find those answers. And so in this episode, I'm just going to tell you exactly what settings we use, and I'm going to show you exactly how we encode the videos. And so without further ado, let's go over to the computer and I'll walk you through exactly how we do it every single week. All right, so we have so much to talk about. We're going to dive right in. Now, the thing is, we have a lot of different editing applications we could talk about. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to really quickly show you some stuff in Adobe Premiere Pro, Adobe Media Encoder, but we're really going to dive in to Final Cut Studio and Final Cut's Apple's Compressor. The thing, though, the reason I want to show you all of these is to just make the point that they are very, very similar. And so when you know the principles from one, it will easily apply to all the others. And so really quickly, I'm going to show you some of the Adobe applications, and then we'll hop over and see some of the Apple applications so you can see how this all works. So I'm in Adobe Premiere Pro, and this is just a video that I created to do a promo for Diane Wallace Photography. And so what I can do here is I've got this video edited. I'm ready to output the file. If I go down here and say Save, well, all I'm doing is I'm saving the project that I'm editing. It's not actually outputting a standalone video. What I need to do when I'm finished is go to Export, and then I'm going to, in Premiere Pro, say Export Media. And as soon as I do that, well, I get this little export settings dialog that pops up here. And the similarities between this and all the other applications are pretty amazing. So we have the source. There's a source tab here and an output tab. And really what that shows me is what the file looked like in its original format, and when I click output, it will show me what it's going to look like once I apply all the settings that are over here on the right hand side. So what I'm going to do here is let's first go to these export settings and really quickly go through those. The first thing that you need to do is select the format. In other words, how do you want this thing to be encoded? Do you want to encode it for a DVD or a Blu-ray? Do you want to encode it as a flash file or just audio? And so on the web, really the king is H.264. That is the standard for today. In the past, we really did a lot of stuff using flash videos, FLV files, but now H.264 is the way to go. So that's what I've chosen. And once I choose that, there are all these presets that I can choose from. And this is really nice. It makes it very, very simple for you to export a video in really high quality without having to know a lot of these different parameters to change. So for example, if I wanted to do a standard definition video, I just choose YouTube SD. When I go over here to output, you'll see that now I have these bars on here. So it's adding the letterbox bars, which I really don't want to do that because this is a high def video, so I want to keep those out. So by choosing widescreen, high definition, you see now they're gone. So that really is a nice feature. Now the other thing this is going to ask me to do is, do I want just the video and audio, or just the audio? Or in this, I can open it in Device Central and see what the video would look like, say, on an iPad or a specific phone, which is really, really nice. And then I have the summary of the settings that I have. If I want to change any of those, I have all of these different tabs down here where I can go in and actually change the file size and the encoding and all kinds of things. We're going to show you how to do that a little bit later in Final Cut. But the important thing is the settings that you'll find in Final Cut, you can also find them right here in Adobe Premiere Pro. They might have slight variations in what they're called, but 99% of them are exactly the same. Now, a couple of things here that I want to point out. One is the bitrate encoding. So we have this CBR, VBR, and VBR2 pass. We'll see that again in Final Cut. CBR is constant bitrate. In other words, keep the data flowing at the same rate no matter what. A variable bitrate is a little bit nicer because there are some parts of a video where you don't have to have a lot of information flowing, and so you can compress the file size by using a variable bitrate, and that's pretty nice. And then this 1 and 2 pass thing, well, I'm going to explain that a little bit later. But when I talk about that in Final Cut, I wanted to make sure that you knew where to find that if you're editing on an Adobe product. Okay, and then there's also the set keyframe distance, which is pretty important as well, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, so I could change audio, I could do all kinds of things, and once I'm done, I could hit OK. The thing that is really nice, if you're editing, again, in Adobe Premiere Pro, go with H.264 and your preset YouTube Widescreen HD, and just go with that preset, and you're going to get really nice video ready for the web. Well, there's another way that you can encode videos, and that is something that we would do if you have a lot of videos to encode, or one video that you have to encode in multiple formats, and that's what I want to show you next. So I'm going to close out Adobe Premiere Pro. I'm not going to save that. So I'm going to go over here to something called Adobe's Media Encoder. And this is CS4. There's a new version, CS5. But it also exists and has even more options, which is really nice. So what this allows you to do is to encode videos without actually having to go into Adobe Premiere Pro, which is really nice if you have a bunch of master files. So let's say you have a file that you encoded for a client and they want it to show up on their website, they want to show it on YouTube, they want to show it on a DVD, and they want to maybe put it on a flash drive to give to people to play on their televisions if they have a newer television. Well, instead of going into Adobe Premiere and saving that one at a time and waiting for it to all render, which can take sometimes an hour or 2 hours depending on how long the video, sometimes even longer than that, well, you can do this in batch. And so what we can do here is I can click this Add button and go out and find a file, or much easier, I can just go to my Finder or Windows Explorer, and then I can just say, you know, here's the video that I have. It's in a master file format, and it's called Mad at My Boyfriend. Maybe here's another one called Twitter Interactive. I'll drag that in here. And now I have this list. And I can go here to this video called Mad at My Boyfriend that we created, and I can say I want it to be in Quicktime format, and I want to have it show up as you know, widescreen. And, you know, I want to have this as H.264, sorry. And I want to make this YouTube widescreen. And you know what? They asked for this to be on a DVD too. So I'm going to say duplicate, and then I'm going to go, here's Mad at My Boyfriend, and Pt.2 DVD, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to make sure this is high quality. And you know what? They wanted it. And so I can just keep duplicating this and do different file formats. And then when I'm done, I can just say Start Queue, and that will just start exporting those one at a time. And when it's done, all my files will be ready. So I can say, go for it. And I can leave my computer running overnight. And when I come in the next morning, everything will be finished, and I don't have to do those one at a time. It's really, really nice. And this is the way that we do almost all of our encoding. We edit all of our videos, and then we put them in a big batch and say, okay, here are all the different videos we have for this week. Here's Digital Photography 1-on-1. We need to export that for YouTube and Vimeo and Howcast, and we need to also edit that and have it go to iTunes. We need to also do our product reviews, and then we have an interview, and so we just load those up and encode all of those, and when we're done each week, we have all of our videos ready to go. Now let me show you another thing here. So I'm going to quit this, and we're going to dive into something called Final Cut Pro. This is part of Final Cut Studio, and here we have our Mad at My Boyfriend video, but I also loaded this up with a couple of other projects here, and the reason for that is I want to show you something called pixel aspect, and it's also known as pixel aspect ratio. Now if I zoom in here really quickly, you'll see that there's this thing called pixel aspect. And what it's doing is, on all of these different videos here, if I zoom in again, you can see that some of these say 1440 by 1080, some say 960 by 720, some say square. And the reason for that is different video formats, depending on what camera you have, what frame rate, what resolution specifically, will either have pixels that are square, or they'll have pixels that are sort of squished. They're longer than they are tall. And if you aren't familiar with that, when you encode videos for the web, well, you can have videos that look very squished. And so I'll show you how to fix that to make sure that everything looks right. So just like in Adobe Premiere Pro, in Final Cut, I can come out here, if I say save, I'm just saving my project. I'm not exporting the video as a standalone video file ready to go. So what I want to do is use export, and there's a couple of options here. Exporting as a QuickTime movie will do just that. You can choose all of the different types of QuickTime movies, but it's only going to do QuickTime. Or I can do a QuickTime conversion, and that will allow me to say, you know what, I want to export this as H.264 or as a AVI file or some other file type that's not QuickTime. So I have those two options. But what I recommend you do is to export as a QuickTime movie and then use your current settings. In other words, use exactly the settings that you use to edit the video, because you're going to output that in its native file format at a really high quality, and so you have this master file that you can then drop into Compressor, which is just like Adobe Media Encoder, and you can slice and dice and export that for DVD or web or iTunes or an iPod or iPad or whatever file size and frame rate you need. So you take your source file, and then you can batch export that, and that is really the reason that we recommend that you do that. So I've already done some exporting here, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit Final Cut Pro here, and I'm not going to save my projects, and I'm going to go to this thing called Compressor. Now, Compressor is Apple's version of Adobe Media Encoder. They're very, very similar, and so all of the stuff that I show you in Compressor here, you can also do in Adobe Media Encoder. The cool thing is, you'll see it's very, very similar. So I can add files, and so I'm going to do that. I'm going to go into my Finder window here, and I'm going to drag Mad at My Boyfriend over, and I'm going to drag Twitter Interactive over. And so I have, again, those same two files that I did in Adobe Media Encoder. Now what I need to do is I need to say, here's how I want those files to be encoded, and then once they're finished, here's where I want those to be saved. And so down here on the lower left-hand corner, I have just that. I have settings and destination. So how to process them, and then what do I do once I'm finished. And what the nice thing is I can go down here. Here is a preset that I've created myself that I want to walk you through and show you how we encode our videos. But if I don't have a preset that I've made myself, there are all kinds of different presets that are stored here, just like Adobe's done. There's stuff for Apple devices, for DVDs, for audio, for QuickTime settings, getting stuff out on the web, motion graphics, podcasting. They've got a ton of different presets. So you can take those at a starting point and then tweak them according to your needs. Most of them, they're ready to go right out of the box, and you're going to get great results. Well, what I've done is I've created this custom setup, and it's named 500K Web 720 HD. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag that onto each of these videos, and then I'm going to walk you through what that is doing. So we'll start here with this Mad at My Boyfriend video, and on the right hand side we have this guy right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this. What this does is on the left hand side, this is showing me what the original video looks like, and on the right hand side it's showing me what the encoded video is going to look like. So I've selected this 500K Web 720 HD as the setting that I want to apply to this. Now what I can do here is, let me make sure I've got that, yep. I can go in here, and here's my output format, and I can click back and forth between these two windows to see what effect it's going to have. Now down here on this, I can see exactly what kind of settings I have. So the very first thing I'll do, and I'll zoom in on this so you can see it, is I have this name. In other words, what setting am I applying? It's 500K Web 720 HD. I'll explain why I named it that in a second, but I can really quickly go in and say, what's the file size, 1280 by 720, which is a 720p video, which is exactly what we want. This pixel aspect ratio is square, which is really important. I'm going to show you what that is. And all these other settings that I've made are going to show up here. Now let's say we want to change some of those things. Well, I have these little tabs right here. So just like in Adobe Media Encoder and Adobe Premiere Pro, you had different tabs for different selections. The same thing is true here. So again, once you know one, you can easily go to another. So what I want to do here is on this, I want to first start with the encoding. Now I've chosen QuickTime Movie, so QuickTime is the file format we're using, and then I'll show you what the video settings are. So once I click on that, I'll zip up here since this is zoomed in. Now we've chosen H.264 as the compression type. Now again, you can choose one of any of these. There's tons of different file types to encode, and this is why it can be so confusing when you're trying to get stuff ready for the web. choose H.264. Once you do that, you need to choose which frame rate you're going to be using. Now, I highly recommend you use the current frame rate. In other words, if you shot in 24 frames per second, keep it at 24 frames per second. If you shot at 30 frames per second, keep it at 30 frames per second. That is going to be the best option for you. If you want to force it to a very specific frame rate, you can say, sorry about that, you can say, I want to make it 2997 or 60 frames per second or whatever it is, but I recommend you keep it at current. The other thing is we have this thing here called Keyframes, and I showed you that on Adobe Premiere Pro. Now the keyframes here are saying how often do I want to have this set. It looks like I need to click something else here. I've clicked off on the wrong thing here. So I'm going to click back here, get in here. So yeah, there we go. All right, so the keyframes, I recommend that you set those every 12 frames. So that's what I recommend doing. And what the keyframe settings are doing is it's saying, let's have a little checkup. So every 12 frames, I want to see exactly if we're on track, if the audio and video are in sync, if everything looks good. And there's a much better explanation than that. That is a very layman's terms way to do that. And so I hope that a lot of you gurus out there that know this very well, if you have links or articles that are about keyframes, you might want to post those. And if we get enough questions about it, I could do a video on keyframes and how these apply to encoding. But for now, if you just want to get started, I recommend that you keep this to every 12 frames, and that will do a good job for you. Also, make sure frame reordering is selected. Your quality, we keep it on high. Now the encoding down here, we have multi-pass or single pass. Now remember on the Adobe Premiere Pro stuff, I said there was this VBR, 1-pass, VBR, 2-pass. Well, what we're doing here is we're saying how many times should the computer go through the video file to figure out how to compress it. Now, a single pass means it goes from the start of the video to the end of the video just once, and it does the very best job it can to compress the file. Now that's good if you have some time constraints, but it's much better to do a multi-pass encoding. In other words, your video is going to be looked at the first time through, and if there are some settings that could be better, well, it's going to go again and do it the second time. So it'll make at least 2 passes, and you're going to get much better quality, but it's going to take you much longer to encode the video because it's going multiple times. Now over here, we have the data rate. Now I recommend you restrict this to 5,000 kilobytes per second. In other words, how much data can be going every single second. If you set that too high, your file is going to be really big, and it's not going to stream very well over the web. And so I recommend that you keep that to 5,000 kilobytes per second, and that seems to be the sweet spot. And I've done a bunch of tests to see what would look like at 3,000 and 8,000 and different data rates. And 5,000 kilobytes per second seems to be the best data rate for use over cable modem and DSL. And so that's why we've selected that. Now the other thing is you need to make sure that you optimize this for streaming. And what that does is it puts this header file on your video, and it makes sure it's right up at the front so that your computer will understand what to do with that file right as soon as it starts playing. You might see an option in some of these where it says optimize for fast start. Well, if you see that, make sure that is also selected. So those are the compression settings that we use. And we're going to make a screenshot of this little window and post it at the Adorama Learning Center so you know exactly what settings to use instead of having to pause and rewind on this video. Okay, now there are a few other things here we need to make sure we understand. One of those is the geometry setting. Now the geometry setting, it basically is asking how big do you want this file to be? Now I recommend you go with 1280 by 720. Now that is a high definition 720p video file size. The reason for that, that's what YouTube and Vimeo use. They don't use 1080p at the time of this recording. They use a 720p. And so you might as well encode to the highest quality that they accept and none higher, because if you go higher than that, you're just throwing away resolution and they're going to re-encode your video. So keep it at 720p. Okay, so there's another thing here that we need to look at really closely, and this is the pixel aspect ratio. And right now it's set to square. If I go up here to the right-hand side, I can go back and forth between the original and the encoded file. And right now it looks exactly the same. But if I change this to something that's not correct, when I go back and forth, see how that's all smooshed out like that? So the original looks good, this one looks smooshed. It's because I've set the wrong pixel aspect ratio. So if I go back here, you can see that it's really smooshed. I need to make sure that I keep that to square. And when I go back and forth here, it looks really good. Because if you set it to something that's other than square, when it goes to the web, well, you're going to have all kinds of issues. So if you start encoding videos and they come out squished and tall looking or flat and squishy looking, well, the first thing to look at is to make sure your frame size is correct. It should be 1280 by 720. And the second thing to look at is your pixel aspect ratio. Make sure it's square, because if those two things are messed up, well, you're going to have wacky looking video. The thing is, it's really fun, is you can do all kinds of different frame sizes here. And if you get the wrong one, well, you're going to have issues. So I'm going to say custom 16 by 9. I can do all kinds of different ones. But we need to make sure that we stick with the one that's right, which is 1280 by 720. And then that will make sure that your video looks good. Now, I've messed that up many times, and when I get my video out and I play it, it just doesn't look right. It's all smooshed in. And that's because either the frame size is wrong, or the pixel aspect ratio is wrong, or both. And that's something that's very, very important. Now, this other thing, this cropping here, is you can actually go in, and if you have like something on the side of the video that you want to get rid of, you can crop the video in, and you can see that now this says the bottom and the left have been cropped in. Now, I don't recommend you do that unless there's something that you just need to slice out of the video. In post-production, usually you're going to crop it in your editing. And so there you have it. So we have the file size, the pixel aspect ratio, the compression settings, the frame rates, the keyframes, all that stuff has been set up correctly. And once you've got that done, then you can submit this and make sure it's all good. So what we're going to do here is, I'm going to get rid of this one really fast. I'm going to take this and then I'm going to submit this. Now, one of the reason that we used Apple's compressor is because I have another thing that comes with this, and it allows you to use all of your computer's processing power. So I'm going to take this, and instead of going to my source, I'm sorry, I forgot. The destination, by the way, can be your source. In other words, the same folder that the source file was in. You can put it on your desktop, and you can put it in a bunch of other places. One of the things that's really, really nice in your destinations here, you can say, I want to set this to a remote site. And you can actually go in here and you can say, I want this to go to an FTP site. And so if you have a client that has an FTP site, you can actually have all your videos encoded, and then it can automatically transfer those over to them, so you're not having to email or do something like that. Or if you're on a Mac, you can actually use iDisk to throw those up on the web, so you can get your files from your computer over to the destination very, very fast. Okay, now that we have this done, I'm going to hit submit, and it's going to ask me something very specific. It's going to say, do you want to use this computer, or do you want to use a cluster? And I want to use a cluster. And we don't have enough time to go into what that is right now, but I'll just give you a really high overview. In other words, what this is doing is it's got some software that Apple has created, and it will allow you to use all of your computer's processing power. And so when I hit submit, I'm going to go into this thing called the batch monitor, and I can say what's going on. And you'll see here that instead of one progress bar, I've got a bunch of progress bars. And so every single core on this computer, I've got a quad-core Xeon processor, is being used to encode this video. So every single piece of muscle that my computer has is being put to use. And that's really going to speed up the encoding time and make sure that you get your videos out there really, really, really fast. Okay, so once all of that stuff goes, it's going to put all those different parts together, and then you're going to have one big file, and everything is going to be good. Now, one of the things that's important to note is this is a very, very small or short video, and so it's only taking us, I think about 30 seconds to encode this. If this was an hour-long video or an hour and a half, or a promo for a company, we do a lot of videos that are 45 minutes, hour and a half. It can take hours to encode those, and so that really makes a big difference if you can use all of the processing power of your computer. And that's one of the reasons we use Final Cut Pro to encode all of our videos, because we have to encode so many videos at such a rapid rate. We need to make sure that we use all of the processing power possible on our computers. So once we've done that, we can go out to our desktop here, and once I do, we have Mad at My Boyfriend. And you can see that Mad at My Boyfriend has the name added to it. So 500K, that's how much the data rate is for the web. It's 720, high definition. And if I hit my space bar, there it is. It's the finished video, ready to go. And you can see that this is 7.6 megabytes down from, I think it was, let's see, it started at, I think 200, yep. So we had, yeah, from 273 megabytes down to 7. So it's quite a big difference. And that is how we encode the videos for the web. All right, well, there you have it. That's how we encode our videos for the web. You can use those settings to make sure your videos look great on iTunes or YouTube or Vimeo or wherever you're putting your videos online. Speaking of videos, this is actually the 5th in a 5-part series all about shooting videos on a DSLR, but we didn't start actually in this series. We started way back in episode 22, where I showed you how to use your videos on a tripod and doing different camera rigs using a matte box and follow focus and all kinds of tricks. And we got so much response from that video that we decided to do this 5-part series. And if you missed it, in episode 48, it's the introduction about shutter angles and frame rates and all kinds of the technical things that you need to know about shooting video. In episode 49, I talk all about lighting for video. Episode 50 was all about getting great sounding audio. And then episode 51 was making sure that that audio and video could sync up and some post-production tips. But we even have more videos than that. On Adorama TV, on our product reviews, we go through a review of all of the products that we've used in these videos. So all the tripods and all the Zacuto rigs and the monitors that we're using and lenses and follow focuses and all the stuff that you're asking about, you know, what's the equipment that you're using? Well, we actually have that in our Adorama TV product review videos, and we walk you through all of those things. And in addition to that, on the Adorama Learning Center, there are a bunch of articles, again, all about photography and shooting video on a DSLR, as well as more product reviews and all kinds of information from other experts, in addition to the videos that I've made. So don't miss out on all of those resources. And if you just don't know where to go to get all of that stuff, you can always just go to the Adorama Learning Center. And our good friend Mason over there has put everything together in one big package, so you can look at all the videos and read all the articles and see all the product reviews, and also you can hear me interview other people talking about shooting video on a DSLR, so you can get their perspective. And so it is a ton of information. So head on over to the Adorama Learning Center so you can see all of that. Well, thank you so much for joining me this week. I'll be back again next week. And remember, if you have a question all about photography or even shooting video on a DSLR, please send your questions to me at AskMark@Adorama.com. Thanks again. I'll see you next week.
This episode is brought to you by Adorama TV. Visit the Adorama Learning Center, where you'll find photography tips and techniques, links to the gear used in this episode, and related videos. For all the latest photography, video, and computer gear, visit Adorama.com. And the next time you're in New York City, visit our store, located on 18th Street between 5th and 6th Avenue.